one of Dennis's family vacations, they went to Colorado and they visited the Cave of the Winds. And as a 9-year-old boy at the time, and somebody who lived on the plains of the plain states where there were no mountains, being there was memorable. It was an exciting experience to be in the mountains and in a mountain cave. But he says the most memorable part of the tour was not the beautiful rock formations in the cave that they went to go see. It was when the tour guide had everyone gather together and turn the lights out. And it was pitch black. We could not see anything, he said. He said, I was uneasy enough myself, but it didn't help that I heard this loud gasp of a woman next to me and a sustained soft moan from the same woman during the time when the lights were out. And when the lights came back on, this frightened and embarrassed, and it happened to be a nun, was squeezing my dad's arms with both hands because she couldn't see. It's a scary sensation, he says, even for an adult, to have your eyes wide open and yet not be able to even see a faint glimmer of light. Dennis adds, most cultures of the world use physical sight as a metaphor for understanding and discernment, and that can certainly apply to spiritual realities as well. In fact, as believers, we live by faith and not by sight. But as Paul prays for the Colossians, we can have spiritual insight and wisdom and understanding. We can see things by faith. And it's this kind of seeing that Elisha's servant does not have. And as a result, he has the same fearful response as the nun. He can't see. But it's not because he's in a pitch black cave. We find our text in 2 Kings 6, verses 8 through 17. This is the word of the Lord. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I'll set up my camp at such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God, and time and again Elisha warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, will you not tell me which one of you is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go, find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men to capture him. The report came back, he's in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early in the morning, an army with horses and chariots surrounded the city, and he said, oh, no, my lord, what will we do? What are we going to do? Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed, oh, Lord, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The word of the Lord. I think we've mostly remedied it by now, thanks to Sandra, but this year we've had a lot of problems with squirrels and or deer eating the tomatoes in the garden. In previous years, they would take a nibble out of one or two, but left most of them alone. This year, they're hollowing out the entire tomato and leaving the shell on the ground. And I wish that we could find a way to know when they planned their meals, right? If we knew when they were going to partake of the tomatoes for a little snack or a meal, I could be there saying, not this time, little squirrel fiend, get out of here. Right? If I could be forewarned about the squirrels, we could prevent them cleaning off the plants. That's something like what's going on with the king of Aram and Elisha. The king of Aram is trying these sneak attacks, these ambushes on the king of Israel and their armies, but every time the king is forewarned by Elisha. Time and time again, Elisha tells them, don't go there. That's where the Syrian troops have set up camp. And like Nehemiah, who prays for their enemies to be frustrated, so the Aramean troops are frustrated every time they try to attack. They're foiled by Elisha's prophetic insight. Time and time again this happens. Time and time again Israel is spared without lifting a sword. This enrages the king. And the word here means that he's stirred up to anger. Imagine a thunderstorm with claps of thunder and lightning and ominous clouds. This is the kind of anger the king of Aram has. He's frustrated that he can't make the attacks he wants. And so what does he do? He naturally assumes that there's a traitor in their midst. I mean, what other assumption would you make? And so he brings his officials before him and says, which one of you is leaking this information? Which one of you is a spy for the other side? Which of you is doing this? And one of the officers vows that it's not one of them, but instead lays the blame with Elisha. The prophet is the one who's informing the king of Israel about everything that they're planning. And just as Elisha knew that Gehazi went to Naaman and tried to get some of those gifts for himself out of greed, so Elisha has prophetic knowledge and insight that these attacks are happening. And the officer even suggests that even the words that the king speaks in his bedroom are known. Nothing is secret to him. Now, how this officer knows this is not explained. But notice, the king accepts the explanation. And he launches a manhunt for Elisha, kind of like Ahab and Jezebel did for Elijah. They launch a manhunt for Elisha, and they find out that he's in Dothan. And so the king, notice all he does. This is just one person, but he musters all his military resources, his horses, his chariots, a strong army to go after Elisha. All this for one person. It shows how much of a nuisance Elisha has been to the king of Aram. He's not going to leave anything to chance. This guy is going to get captured, and this is going to put an end to all this telling the plans to the king of Israel. It's a little bit interesting that he would think that would succeed, since none of the other ambushes succeeded. Somehow he thinks this ambush on Elisha is going to succeed, but he plans, and they go by night, suggesting another surprise ambush. And this time they do surround the city. They do make it to Dothan and have Elisha and his servant surrounded. And that's not a very good thing to wake up to, is it? You probably, that's a pretty good indicator that this is not going to be a good day. If you wake up, as the servant does of Elisha, and sees the city surrounded by the Aramean troops. And his fearful response is, oh no, what are we going to do? It sounds a lot like the cry of distress from the prophet that we looked at last week, who lost the axe head of his friend that he borrowed it from. He said, oh no, it was borrowed. This is also a cry of distress, but this is a much greater dilemma. This is more like the life and death situation. The axe head was a borrowing situation. This is life or death. What are we going to do? It seems like that question's been asked maybe once or twice in 2020. What are we going to do? The coronavirus pandemic hits. Oh no, what are we going to do? The quarantine is announced, and shortages of toilet paper and hand sanitizer. What are we going to do? Especially about the toilet paper one, right? What are we going to do? Racial tensions erupt. Riots and protests begin happening. What are we going to do? Unemployment hits all-time highs, and the economy begins to plummet. What are we going to do? Schools announce that they're going to be in-person part-time and online or all online. And I've got to be telling you, honestly, I've been asking that question this week. What are we going to do? Because Grandview School District has said they're going all online. So you're looking at a homeschool teacher. What are we going to do? Seriously, Lord, what are we going to do? The pandemic shows no signs of slowing down. What are we going to do? And then add on top of that all of our own personal concerns and cares. And that question is like a broken record. And that it just repeats itself over and over. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? According to the American Optometry Association, 20/20 vision is a term used to express normal vision acuity. It's the clarity or sharpness of vision measured at a distance of 20 feet. If you have 20/20 vision, it means that you can see normally what a person is supposed to at 20 feet, which I don't. That's why I have to wear glasses. You're blurry right now without them, right? In 20/20, there's another kind of vision that we might become more aware of. I think we're all becoming more aware of that we need. And it's the kind of vision this passage is talking about, spiritual insight and understanding of what's going on. Like the men of Issachar in 2 Chronicles who understood the times and knew what to do, I've got to tell you, I've sensed my own need to answer the questions we're facing, answer that question. What are we going to do with hope and wisdom and with faith? But honestly, it's sometimes, those are answers hard to come by. And honestly, I don't have all the answers. What are we going to do? That's a natural question. The servant's question is a natural one in such circumstances. And Elisha's response may not have been well received at first. He says, don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Oh, really, Elisha? What kind of new math are you doing? Because I count you and me and these hundreds of soldiers around the city. What are you talking about? And Elisha realizes he has to pray for his servant's eyes to be open to see the unseen resources available that God has provided. And the Lord immediately answers the prayer, and the servant is able to see that the hills surrounding them are filled with the horses and chariots of the Lord's armies. And this, of course, recalls Elijah's earlier transport to heaven by the chariots of fire. This is the reason not to be afraid. That's why he can say this. Don't be afraid. It's not just to try to answer, oh, don't worry about it. He's not saying that. He's saying, don't be afraid. Look at all the unseen resources that God has provided for our protection and help. Don't be afraid. God is present in this situation. Or to use Pastor Wayne's vernacular from last week, don't be afraid is another way of saying God's got this. Remember his testimony last week? Don't be afraid is another way of saying God's got this. Dennis Bratcher answers or asks, how often do we have eyes and yet do not see? We see the problems, yet we sometimes have trouble seeing beyond our adversity to the resources God can provide to us. Sometimes God's resources will enable us to emerge on top. Often, no, God will just enable us to survive the onslaught. Sometimes God will give us strength to maintain a Christ-like spirit in the midst of the hardships and ill-treatment at the hands of others. Yet, the resources of God are there, even if we can't see them with our physical eyes. And God's presence is with us, even if we can't feel his presence. Divine resources and the assurance of God's presence is reason to not be afraid. Bratcher continues, trusting God then, even when we can't see the chariots of fire on the mountain, is spiritual sight. We call it faith. That means the Lord is not aloof in this situation or any other. He's not unaware of their trouble or ours. And this implies that a deliverance is coming. And the Lord does deliver them, but probably not in the way that we might expect, which is another word to us, right? That God's deliverance may not look like or be when we want it. But his resources are there to help us navigate through it and perhaps even deliver us from it sometimes. Surprisingly, I say that because surprisingly, the armies of the Lord that were just revealed to this servant do nothing. They do not stop these soldiers from Aram. They don't fend them off. They start going in toward Elisha. And so Elisha instead prays that the army of Aram will be blinded, which is a little bit ironic because he just prayed for the servant's eyes to be opened. And now he prays for them to be blinded. Verse 18. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike these people with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, "This is not the road and this is not the city. Follow me and I will lead you to the man you're looking for." And he led them to Samaria. After they had entered the city, Elisha said, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so that they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes and they looked, and there they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, Father? Shall I kill them?" "Do not kill them," he answered. "Would you kill men you've captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them, and let them eat and drink so they can go back to their master." So he prepared a great feast for them. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. The effectiveness of Elisha's prayers is highlighted again. I thought of James's words about Elijah that could be just as easily spoken about Elisha. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. We saw that with Elijah and the rain. Here we see it in these instances. The Lord immediately answers Elisha. And again, the prayer is answered in this case about the armies of Aram, that they're blinded. He says, open their eyes about the servant, and now he says, blind them, and that's what happens. Elisha leads this enemy army 12 miles south to Israel's capital city of Samaria. Elisha and his servant will be safe there. And when they arrive, now Elisha prays, just as he had prayed for his servant, open their eyes. And when their eyes are open, they realize that they're now at the mercy of Israel. They had come on the attack to Dothan to find Elisha, but now they're surrounded themselves now and at the mercy of Israel. But the king of Israel, notice, doesn't want to show them any mercy. He says, let's kill them. Shall I kill them, Elisha? But Elisha says, no, they're going to be shown mercy. You didn't capture these troops in battle. You have no right to kill them. Instead, feed them. Give them something to drink. Send them back to their master. Roger Hahn says, Elisha's reply shows that when your eyes are really opened, you understand these Syrians have no power in any way. And the king does that. He defers to Elisha, and he treats the enemy like their honored guest. He doesn't give them scraps or stale bread. He sets a feast before them. He doesn't take revenge on them and try to kill them. Instead, he feeds them and gives them something to drink. This echoes Jesus' teaching, bless those who curse you, pray for those who persecute you, love your enemy. In fact, the king of Israel carries out, that's not just the New Testament, the king of Israel carries out what's spoken in Proverbs 25:21, which is quoted in Romans 12:20. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink, for by doing so, you'll heap burning coals on their heads. And really, if you think about it, killing the Aramean soldiers would just incite more war and revenge. This response, though, opens the king's eyes and the troops' eyes to another way. This act of mercy, this kindness, ends the war. Notice the end of verse 23. And for a while, the Syrian troops stopped invading Israel's territory. Now, admittedly, that might not work that way every time, right? Other situations might call for a different response, but this is what happens here. And it does look forward to what the prophets Isaiah and Micah envision will happen in the future. Isaiah 2:4 and Micah 4:3 say, "The Lord shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." So their eyes are open. In fact, this whole text, this whole account is about eyes being opened. Some are shut, some don't see, some are blinded purposely, but only in order for them to see. See both spiritual realities and truth. The servant's eyes are open to God's presence. The servant's eyes are open to unseen spiritual realities and resources. The king's eyes are open to an alternative to revenge and more death, and so are the troops. And the troops' eyes are open to experience God's mercy. During this sermon series, I hope our eyes have been open to the God of miracles. To see that brand new possibilities are always possible with God. If we don't need that reminder now, we will in the future at some point. That brand new possibilities are always possible with God. He's the God of miracles. We learned that. Nothing's too difficult for him. We can believe him for a miracle, to act in accordance with his promises. He can make a way where there is no way. That's why nobody or no situation is a lost cause. And then from Elijah's encounter with the Lord on Mount Horeb in 1 Kings 19, we also came across the acknowledgement that not only is God present in the spectacular, in the extraordinary, but he's also with us in the everyday and ordinary moments of our lives, just as much. Right? That's the word of caution. Don't miss God in the ordinary. Yes, expect a miracle, believe him for a miracle, but don't miss him in what he's doing right now in your life. God does the extraordinary and spectacular, but Roger Hahn adds, Elijah needed to learn that God's power is now experienced only in such dramatic and visible ways. God's power is just as present and just as powerful when there's only silence. Then in 2 Kings 4, we added to that God often does unexpected miracles and gives us unexpected blessings that we hadn't even anticipated. Not that we can promise you that. I can't promise you that this week he'll do an unexpected miracle for you, but I'm not going to rule it out either. Remember, we talked about that. And now this account invites us a step further, to ask him to open our eyes to his loving, active presence and to what the Lord is doing in our lives and in the world. Open our eyes, Lord, to help address the servant's question that we often find ourselves asking or will find ourselves asking. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? With our eyes enlightened to know the hope that which we have been called, Ephesians 1 read this morning, our fears will be addressed so that we can do what God's people have always done in times like this. Trust the Lord. Psalm 105 verses 4 and 6 put it well and encourages us to seek the Lord in his strength, to seek his presence continually, to remember the wonderful works he's done and his miracles. We're going to sing that prayer then this morning for the Lord to open our eyes. And it's an invitation for us to pray that not only when we're afraid, as in this text, when we're afraid, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Not only in those times, but also always, Lord, open our eyes and remind us of your faithfulness. Reveal your presence to us. Reveal the resources available to us. Renew our confidence in your saving power so that we'll be able to say, to use Pastor Wayne's vernacular again, God's got this. And Carter's going to give a presentation at this time, if you'll come and do that, Carter. Last week, Pastor Wayne shared in his testimony that if he had a button that said "God's got this," he'd wear it all the time. And it's a way of saying, I'm suggesting, don't be afraid. It's a way of suggesting God's got this. And so Carter has something for you, Wayne. But that's not just a message for Pastor Wayne. Julia, Pastor Wayne, after the service Sunday, said, I want to design a button for him. So now you're going to have to wear this every day, Wayne. She said, I want to design a button for him, and I'll even pay for it out of my chore money. So we got online, and she designed this button for you. It says, God's got this, Psalm 40 on the top, the psalm we read, and then 2020. And as we got online to do this, she thought, well, maybe we could just make one for everyone. So today, as you leave today, you'll receive a button, God's got it. As a reminder of Elisha's words, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Musicians, if you would come. And as they come, perhaps there's someone here that needs to embrace that message, and maybe it's somebody who would need their eyes opened in another way. Maybe it's somebody you're thinking of. Maybe it's somebody who will watch this video later. Perhaps it's a person like the man born blind in John 9, who not only received his physical sight ability to see, but in that text, as you read it, he gets more and more clarity about who Jesus is. And he comes to worship him at his feet and says, Lord, I believe, and worships Jesus. Perhaps there's some today whom the Lord has been getting their attention, and you hear him calling you to himself, and these altars are open for you to come in response, to confess that you've gone your own way, and to turn to him to receive his forgiveness and love. And to bow before Jesus and say, Lord, I believe. See, that's what Jesus came to do, John 9 says. He came into the world so that those who don't see may see.